The readings today have a richness really for us. But the gospel that I just read is a little bit counterintuitive. It's pretty clear that Jesus is talking about his death. You know, John 14, the context is the night before he died. And he's telling the disciples that he's assuring them that he's going to send the advocate, the Holy Spirit, to sustain them. And he even says he's going to give them peace. And they should even be happy that he's going. And that's counterintuitive because any of us who've experienced losses know that it doesn't fill up. You don't, the hole in your heart, so to speak, doesn't just fill up like the sea closing in again. I was thinking of that this week in particular. I went to visit a friend, a priest friend of mine, who was very much a mentor of mine throughout my entire ministry. He set the example, the standard to which I aspire. But it was somewhat a sad visit because with dementia, he's not really there. I can't have the conversations, I can't have the laughs that I once had with him. He asked me at least 12 times how old I was, and so on. You know how it works. And it's a sad thing. I don't know, when you lose a mentor, a person who's been a guiding light for you, they don't just spring up from the earth. And ironically, the next day I was talking to one of my relatives, and she was telling me that she is beginning to pay her bills twice or not pay them at all, and going out driving in a city that she's been in for 60 years and not being able to find her way home. And so, and we spent the afternoon showing her how to use a Garmin, the GPS, so that if she gets lost, she can just press go home and it'll get her home again. But that's a huge loss, someone who was part of raising you is now. So isn't it counterintuitive then? Don't we say to ourselves, how could the disciples be at all happy that Jesus was leaving? I mean, he knew what was going to happen. Some would betray, all would run, etc., and that they would be left. So how can that be that Jesus is going to, that'll be okay? Well, the promise is the focus, is the advocate, the Holy Spirit. What Jesus says is that it's no longer going to be like him, flesh and blood, but it's going to be within him. He describes it, I've told you, the advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of what I told you. And he says, and the way to stay open to that, as he points out above, whoever loves me keeps my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. In other words, and then the converse is also true. The person who doesn't love him doesn't keep his word. And so what Jesus is saying is, look, he's going to give us, within us, the Holy Spirit that's going to sustain us. And all we need to do is keep the door open to receive the gift. And the way to do that is to live the loving example and teaching of Jesus, his words. And the words, as he points out, are not from him, really. They're from his Father, from God. God doesn't ask, he only asks that we be ready to receive. And the point that Jesus makes over and over again in the Gospel of John is that living a lie closes the door, closes us off. It's like perhaps the self-isolation or the isolation that happens, when someone kind of removes themselves. And Jesus is saying, stay in my word, stay in the promise, and then you'll receive that peace beyond which anything the world can give you. And you can see how in the other two readings it really became quite practical. The problem between, as I explained, in the first reading, between the pagan followers of Christ and Jewish followers of Christ was that they had a great clash of, well, how does one serve Christ? And within the 20 years of the death and resurrection of Christ, it became the main issue. There were mischief makers who came into different places saying, no, you can't follow Christ without being circumcised, without trying to be as Jewish as Jesus was Jewish. And I encourage you to, if you have time, to read all of chapter 15 in Acts that we read today. It gives you the dynamic of what was happening. So these people came to Antioch where Barnabas, and there had been a somewhat harmonious community, and it created a rift. People separated. They wouldn't eat with one another, therefore they wouldn't celebrate the Eucharist. And you heard the results. After Paul and Barnabas had a chance to talk with James and Peter in Jerusalem, they realized that God was working a different way. So they not only sent a letter, as you heard the letter, but they sent Silas and Judas Barsabas. I guess, in case they couldn't tell the definition of what is. So they sent two people along to underline their point that they were not putting any burden on those who had converted from non-Jewish religions to following Christ. And then, as they said, it is the decision of the Holy Spirit and our decision. They had, because they kept the doors open to the Word of Christ, they could feel in confidence that the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus Christ sent by the Father, was guiding them in that decision. That's why they talked in that way. And then, of course, in the second reading from Revelation, as I said, many believe that type of literature of Revelation was born out of incredible persecution and suffering. People were dying. People were tortured. People were apostatizing, abandoning the faith because of the pressure the Romans put on them. And so he writes, the writer of Revelation says, look, there is a new world coming by the Holy Spirit. And you don't need a temple anymore. The temple is the Lamb, is God himself. You don't need the sun or the moon anymore because the light comes from God. And it's built on the foundation of the 12 courses of the apostles, and it's open to the whole world. There are gates facing east and north and west and south. So he's presenting in a time of another kind of pressure. So that the Holy Spirit that God gives us, if we keep our hearts open, we do have the peace, and not as the world gives it. Not just freedom from war or freedom from violence. That's a good thing, but that really isn't the peace that opens you totally to the world. The peace that God gives is the peace that directs our life and lets us love our enemy, not just not attack our enemy, but to love our enemy, just as Jesus did. So there's a richness, and in a couple of weeks when we celebrate Pentecost, then we'll really focus again. But the promise is here. The promise, and all we have to do is just keep our hearts open to receive the power and the love and the discernment and the counsel of the Holy Spirit, the gift of the Spirit the Father gives us, the Spirit of Jesus. So let us see the vision that the writer of Revelation gives us. Go toward the light and keep our hearts completely open to the power of Christ in